The man remembered by history as Albert Einstein was born on the 14th of March, 1879 inches, the city of Ulm, located in the south of what was then the German Empire. Ulm was an important urban center within the Kingdom of Württemberg, a major part of the German state in the late 19th century. His father was Hermann Einstein, an Ashkenazi Jew from Bukow in Württemberg. Hermann had shown strong academic promise and a notable talent in applied mathematics while studying in Stuttgart, the capital of Württemberg, during his youth. However, the Einstein family was not wealthy, and Hermann was forced to give up his studies and take work in a featherbed shop run by his cousins, Moses and Hermann Levi, in Ulm during the 1872. Albert's mother was Pauline Koch, from a family of German Jews who had built extensive networks as merchants and traders in Württemberg. She married Hermann Einstein in 1876, and Albert was their first child. A daughter, Maja, also known as Maria Einstein, was born 2 years later in 1881. Albert's early life was largely shaped by his father's business affairs. While Albert was still an infant, Hermann Einstein, following advice from his brother Jakob, decided to move the family to Munich, the largest city in southern Germany, about 170 kilometers east of Ulm. This took place in 1880, as Jakob and Hermann attempted to establish Einstein & Co. as an electrical engineering firm in Munich, just as the great age of electrification was beginning across the Western world. There, Albert was enrolled in a Catholic elementary school before later transferring to the Luitpold Gymnasium in Munich in 1887. Albert remained there until 1894, but once again the family was uprooted when Hermann and Jakob failed to secure a contract to help electrify Munich. Instead, they moved to northern Italy, settling first in Milan and later in Pavia. Albert initially stayed behind in Munich to continue his studies, but after several months he grew disillusioned with the strict rote learning at the gymnasium and persuaded both his parents and school officials to allow him to leave and join them in Italy. He held this position for several years. Besides supporting his young family, his work exposed him to a variety of devices related to electrical conduction and mechanics, which may have influenced his own thinking during these formative years. The way in which Einstein rose from near total obscurity within the scientific community to become one of Europe's leading physicists is among the most remarkable stories in the history of science. While completing his doctorate and working at the patent office in the early 1900s, Einstein prepared a series of papers for submission to Annalen der Physik, one of the world's foremost physics journals. This resulted in 4 separate papers published in 1905. Individually, each made a significant contribution to physics. Collectively, they revolutionized humanity's understanding of the atomic and molecular world and laid the foundations of modern physics. For this reason, 1905 is remembered as Einstein's Annus Mirabilis, or Miracle Year. The first of these papers examined the photoelectric effect, a phenomenon in which light striking a metal surface causes the emission of electrons. Einstein proposed that light did not behave solely as a continuous wave, as most physicists believed, but also as discrete packets of energy, later called photons. This bold idea explained experimental results that classical physics could not, and it eventually earned Einstein the Nobel Prize in Physics many years later. In his second paper, Einstein focused on Brownian motion, the random movement of tiny particles suspended in a fluid. By providing a mathematical explanation for this motion, he offered convincing proof of the existence of atoms and molecules, which were still debated by some scientists at the time. This work helped settle one of the great scientific questions of the 19th century. The third paper introduced what became known as the special theory of relativity. In it, Einstein challenged the long-held assumption that time and space were absolute. He showed that measurements of time and distance depend on the relative motion of the observer, and that the speed of light remains constant for all observers, regardless of their movement. These ideas overturned centuries of Newtonian physics and transformed how scientists understood the universe. Closely connected to this was his fourth paper, in which Einstein derived the now famous equation E equals mc squared. This simple formula revealed that mass and energy are fundamentally equivalent and can be converted into one another. Although its practical implications were not immediately clear, the equation would later become central to nuclear physics and modern energy research. At the time of their publication, these papers attracted limited attention outside specialist circles. Einstein was still an obscure patent clerk in Bern. Yet within a few years, physicists across Europe began to realize the extraordinary importance of his work. Invitations to lecture followed, and his reputation steadily grew. In 1909, Einstein left the patent office to accept his first full academic post at the University of Zurich. This marked the beginning of his formal career as a university professor. Over the next several years, he taught in Zurich, then in Prague, and later returned to Zurich before eventually being offered a prestigious position in Berlin in 1914. While Europe was descending into the turmoil of the First World War, Einstein devoted himself to a far more ambitious problem, extending his theory of relativity to include gravity. After years of intense work, he completed the general theory of relativity in 1915. In this theory, gravity was no longer seen as a force acting at a distance, but as the curvature of space and time caused by mass and energy. General relativity made predictions that differed from those of Newtonian physics, including the bending of light as it passed near massive objects. In 1919, during a solar eclipse, British astronomer Arthur Eddington led an expedition that confirmed this effect. When the results were announced, newspapers around the world proclaimed Einstein a genius, and his name became known far beyond scientific circles. Almost overnight, Einstein was transformed into an international celebrity. He was invited to speak in universities and public halls across Europe and beyond. His image appeared in newspapers and magazines, and he became widely regarded as the symbol of modern scientific brilliance. In 1921, Einstein was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics, not for relativity, which was still considered controversial by some, but for his explanation of the photoelectric effect. The award formally recognized his profound impact on physics and secured his place among the greatest scientists in history. Throughout the 1922, Einstein traveled extensively, visiting the United States, South America, and Asia. He lectured on relativity, met political leaders, and was welcomed as one of the most famous intellectuals of his age. At the same time, he continued to work on theoretical problems and took part in intense debates about the emerging theory of quantum mechanics. One of his most famous intellectual rivals was the Danish physicist Niels Bohr. Einstein was troubled by the idea that events at the smallest scales of nature could be governed by probability rather than strict laws. His objections were summed up in his famous remark that God does not play dice with the universe, reflecting his deep belief in an orderly and deterministic reality. Despite his success, Einstein remained deeply concerned about political developments in Europe. He was a committed pacifist and spoke out against militarism and nationalism. As anti-Semitism intensified in Germany and Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, Einstein, who was Jewish, realized he could no longer safely remain in his homeland. While traveling abroad, he decided not to return to Germany. He renounced his German citizenship and accepted a permanent position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, in the United States. There, he would spend the rest of his career continuing his research in relative peace. Einstein arrived in the United States at a time when the world was once again moving toward conflict. Although he valued his quiet life in Princeton, events in Europe soon forced him to confront the growing threat posed by Nazi Germany. Reports that German scientists might be attempting to develop powerful new weapons deeply alarmed him. In 1939, urged by fellow physicists Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner, Einstein signed a letter addressed to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The letter warned that nuclear chain reactions in uranium could lead to the creation of extremely powerful bombs, and that Germany might already be pursuing such research. This message helped prompt the United States government to begin what would later become the Manhattan Project. Although Einstein himself played no direct role in the development of the atomic bomb, his famous equation, E equals mc squared, lay at the heart of the science behind nuclear energy. When the bombs were finally dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, Einstein was deeply shaken. He later expressed regret over his involvement in alerting Roosevelt and became an outspoken advocate for nuclear disarmament. In the years following the war, Einstein devoted much of his energy to promoting peace and international cooperation. He supported the creation of a world government and warned repeatedly that humanity now possessed the power to destroy itself. His public statements carried enormous weight, as he had become not just a scientist, but a moral voice on global affairs. At the Institute for Advanced Study, Einstein continued his scientific work, focusing on his lifelong ambition to develop a unified field theory, a single framework that would bring together all the fundamental forces of nature. Despite decades of effort, he was never able to achieve this goal, but his attempts inspired many younger physicists to explore new paths in theoretical research. Outside of science, Einstein remained a deeply thoughtful and independent-minded individual. He wrote essays on philosophy, politics, and education, and spoke out strongly against racism and injustice, particularly in the United States. He supported civil rights for African Americans and corresponded with leading activists of the time, believing that equality was essential to a just society. Despite his fame, Einstein lived a remarkably simple life. He cared little for luxury, often wore the same clothes day after day, and took pleasure in modest routines. Music was one of his greatest joys, and he frequently played the violin, finding in it both relaxation and inspiration. He once remarked that imagination was more important than knowledge, because knowledge is limited, while imagination embraces the entire world. Einstein's personal life, however, was often troubled. His marriage to Mileva Maric ended in divorce in 1919, and although he later married his cousin Elsa Lowenthal, that relationship also faced strains. His second son, Edward, suffered from severe mental illness and spent much of his life in care institutions, a source of deep sorrow for Einstein in his later years. As he grew older, Einstein became increasingly aware that his time was limited. Yet he continued working almost to the very end, driven by the same curiosity that had guided him since childhood. To colleagues and visitors in Princeton, he remained approachable, often greeting them with warmth and humor despite his legendary status. On the 18th of April 1955, Albert Einstein died in Princeton, New Jersey, at the age of 76, after suffering an aortic aneurysm. True to his lifelong beliefs, he refused surgery, choosing instead to meet death naturally and with dignity. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered in a private ceremony, in keeping with his wish for simplicity. With his passing, the world lost one of the greatest minds it had ever known. From a curious child who questioned authority to the architect of modern physics, Einstein had transformed humanity's understanding of time, space, matter, and energy. His theories reshaped science, technology, and even philosophy, influencing generations of thinkers who followed. Today, Albert Einstein's name is synonymous with genius. Yet behind the legend was a man driven not by ambition or power, but by wonder and an unrelenting desire to understand the universe. His life stands as a testament to the power of curiosity, imagination, and the courage to challenge accepted ideas. In changing how we see the cosmos, Einstein also changed how we see ourselves. As a young man, in the 1890 seconds, Einstein lived almost as a wanderer, moving between Germany, Italy, and Switzerland, while his family struggled to find financial stability. Even then, his rare gift for mathematics and physics was becoming clear. His years at the Polytechnic School in Zurich finally gave him some structure, but when he graduated, Europe's universities saw little promise in him. Instead of a prestigious academic post, Einstein found himself working as a clerk at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. Day after day, he examined technical inventions, quietly supporting his young family, but in the evenings and spare moments, his mind roamed far beyond patents. It was there, in this unassuming office, that he began shaping ideas that would soon shake the foundations of science itself. Then came the year that changed everything, 1905. In what would later be called his miracle year, Einstein published 4 revolutionary papers that transformed humanity's understanding of the universe. He revealed the quantum nature of light, proved the reality of atoms, introduced the special theory of relativity, and unveiled the famous equation that linked mass and energy. In a single year, an unknown patent clerk became a giant of modern physics. From that point on, Einstein's rise was swift. He moved from one academic post to another, gaining recognition across Europe. By the time he reached Berlin before the First World War, he stood at the very peak of European science. Even amid the chaos of war, his mind pushed forward, culminating in the general theory of relativity, a radical new vision of gravity as the bending of space and time itself. In 1921, Einstein received the Nobel Prize in Physics, cementing his place in history. But fame brought with it a new role. No longer just a scientist, he became a public figure, a voice heard across continents. His travels took him to America, South America, the Middle East, and Asia, where crowds gathered not merely to see a physicist, but a symbol of human intellect and curiosity. Yet the growing darkness in Europe soon overshadowed these triumphs. With the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime in 1933, Einstein, a Jew and an outspoken pacifist, knew he could never return to Germany. He renounced his citizenship and settled permanently in the United States, taking up a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where he would remain for the rest of his life. From America, Einstein watched in horror as the world plunged into another devastating war. Though committed to peace, he reluctantly warned the U.S. government about the possibility of Nazi Germany developing nuclear weapons. This warning helped set in motion the research that would eventually lead to the atomic bomb. When the bombs were used in Japan in 1945, Einstein was deeply troubled, later calling for the abandonment of war itself as a means of resolving human conflict. When Einstein died in 1955, the world mourned not only a brilliant scientist, but a unique human being. He had reshaped physics, challenged the limits of knowledge, and forever altered how we perceive reality itself. His life story is a powerful reminder that greatness does not always begin with success. From a struggling student and overlooked graduate to a lonely patent clerk, and finally, to the most celebrated scientist on Earth, Einstein's journey shows how persistence, imagination, and courage can change the world. So, when we ask what made Albert Einstein so extraordinary, perhaps the answer lies not only in his equations, but in his refusal to accept easy answers, in his endless curiosity about the universe and humanity's place within it. More than half a century after his death, his ideas still shape our technology, our science, and our understanding of the cosmos. What do you think of Albert Einstein? Was he the most revolutionary thinker of the modern age? And what might explain the depth of his genius? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for watching.